This episode is sponsored by the Scott Box, sending novelty Scottish care packages full of all those yummy treats from Scotland, such as Iron Brew and Tunnocks, to Australia. Go to www.thescott-box.com and use the code Britstralian to get 10% off your order. All the links are on the page that you're listening to this podcast. Many of us Brits who've moved to Australia rely on social media as a way to connect with each other and to help us navigate our way through life down under. Around 10 years ago, our next guest started a Facebook group with a couple of mates, and it's now become the largest online community for Brits living in Perth.
I'm Russell Burder from a lovely island in the Thames Estuary called Canvey Island in Essex. I'm married to an Australian with Italian background, and we have 3 beautiful little Brit-Australian children.
Russ is the founder of the Facebook group Poms in Perth. Pom is an endearing term that the Aussies like to use for the English, and it goes all the way back to the year 1788, when the first convicts arrived in Australia. Can you tell our listeners who might not know what the word Pom means?
Oh, I believe Pom means prisoner of Her Majesty, and I've always been confused why that is attached to us and not actually attached to the Australians. For me, that's the biggest puzzle that I've ever had since I've come out here, but they want to call us Poms, so I've kind of just adopted that, and, you know, there's no point getting upset. The Australians are used to sledging, so we just accept it and move on.
We are in their country.
Exactly, yeah.
Could you just tell us a little bit, because I found this hilarious. I heard you on a radio interview and you explained how this Facebook group came about. So can you tell us where its origins started? Yeah,
look, it was really an accidental setup. It was set up as a bit of a pub group, basically. So came out to Perth 15 years ago. We were all pretty new to Facebook. I think it kicked off when we were all at university, say maybe 16, 17 years ago. And I was pretty fresh in Perth, and they brought up a groups function. So me and a couple of mates, we all worked offshore. So we're all up on the oil and gas. So we're all working offshore on the rigs there as surveyors. And we said, look, why don't we use this new groups function, set up a little group, and we'll use it just to coordinate when we're all back in Perth. It really wasn't intended to be what it is today. And we just started getting random people joining. And we're like, I remember saying to one of my friends, Ollie, I said, what do we do? And he said, well, I've never heard of him. Who is he? Oh, I don't know. Do we just accept? I mean, what happens? He goes, oh, let's just accept. And it was, you know, there was a couple of people joined in the first few weeks. Then there was a few more. But then it just started taking off. And because we went offshore, you didn't really have that good a connection with internet. And we'd get back from being offshore and we're like, geez, there's 30 people that want to join. Okay, let's let them in, and it just grew from there. And then obviously the admin team I've got around me, Helen, Mark, Dave, well, the 2 Marks, through that process they joined and then really helped kind of drive and manage that group. So yeah, that's its history really.
So you've got 5 people running this for you now?
I really don't understand how they have the time of the day between having 3 young kids myself, a pretty intense job, and having this group which has just grown arms and legs. Having Helen and the team there has just been a godsend, because I don't think it could be managed the way it is. And I don't know how she has the time of the day to do it, and the rest of the guys there.
Yeah, wow, it has really taken off, hasn't it? How many members have you got now?
I think we've got over 27,000. So it's pretty mental.
Wow. And are you noticing more people joining at certain times of the year, or has there been like an influx of people at some time? Or
I can't really say whether during the COVID lockdown we've seen an influx of people joining. All I can say is that between the 5 of us, there's it's probably 60 to 100 requests a week coming in.
Wow, that's a lot of people joining. Okay, so this group where people ask for advice on things like how can you get EastEnders on the telly over here, or for anyone listening in the UK, we can't access BBC iPlayer, by the way. Or, you know, they'll post a photo of a creepy crawly they found in their house and they'll ask if anyone knows if they need to be worried, if it's dangerous. So can you tell us a little bit about this group and how it's helpful to people who live here?
Yeah, I guess I'll latch on to the funny part, the spider question. Look, to be honest, I'm the biggest wuss with spiders, and I don't know if it's an ongoing joke with Poms over here at the moment, but yeah, the amount of times we'll get a spider picture and the comments, sometimes it's just interesting just to sit there with a glass of wine, with your missus or your partner, whoever it might be, and just read some of the comments because they're hilarious. And you can guarantee the first comments will be, get the deodorant can out, set it alight, burn the house down, blow torch it, move out. It's just, there's some crazy responses there. And most of the time it's a daddy long leg spider, or someone say, is this some man-eating tarantula that lives in Perth and lurks under my sink? It's like, no, it's just it's a little innocent spider that's not going to harm you. And then occasionally you see a red back and you go, yeah, probably don't put your hand anywhere near that. Maybe it's best to try and get rid of it. But yeah, it was pretty comical. I mean, that's the comical side, but then you get the serious stuff as well. So you'll get the request about visa assistance, or someone wanting a tradie that, you know, comes recommended and people can trust, because I think people have a slight fear that they're going to get, I guess, taken a run for their money with the tradies. And I mean, my experience has been really good in Perth, but, you know, people love to give a good recommendation. So a lot of that sort of stuff gets shared on there as well.
Yeah, it is really useful. I've actually found it useful. I've found an electrician off of there and all sorts. It's brilliant. Do you think it's like a little community for the Brits who live here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've mentioned it yet. My partner's Australian. Her family are originally Italian. They had the old Italian clubs. So when you look at her grandparents, or a nonno and nonna, that's words I've learned recently. But when you look at the old grandparents, they had the Italian clubs. And in our modern day era, we have the digital rooms. And I think Ponds in Perth kind of sits in that. It's not quite the same, but it kind of sits there. We don't have an English club we all wander down to and play bowls and throw darts and drink, I don't know, pints of Carlin. But we have Ponds in Perth, and sometimes it can be just as good.
So you got married to an Australian-Italian lady?
Yes.
Yeah, wow. So you met here, did you?
Yeah, I met here. I just through mutual friends, actually. I guess the rest is history. We met that day and then got married and had 3 kids, and yeah, there you go.
And is she the reason that you're in Perth today?
Yeah. I think we probably have all got similar stories on that, because I think if I hadn't met my wife, I probably was having a few wobbles. So I was considering going back to the UK, but then I met my wife, and yeah, your whole outlook changes, and Perth's amazing. So
it is.
That just helped stay, really. That just cemented the decision of why I came out.
How long had you been here before you met your wife?
We've been married 8 years, and we've known each other for probably 9. So of the 15, so I would have been out here for about 6 years before I met my wife.
Wow, so you were here for quite a while.
Yeah,
and you weren't actually sure that this is where you were going to stay.
Yeah, I was still having a few. I was still having, because my I was still having a few wobbles, really. I had a few kind of hit and miss girlfriends, and I was working offshore, and there was just a few things going on. I think I was having that wobble, and I was thinking, do I go back to the UK? And it literally was at the time I met my wife.
Yeah, it does make a difference, actually, when you meet somebody here and you settle. So how often do you go home? Do you call England home? What do you say?
How often do I go back? I think I probably do still refer to it as home. I think it's less and less. And because of COVID and having 3 kids and getting married and buying a house and all those other wonderful things, it has an impact on your finances as you're kicking off on that journey. So I've gone back less in later years. So it's probably last time I went back was maybe 2 years ago now, which is probably not that bad. But before that, I hadn't gone back for 4 years. And then, I was going back every year for about the first 7 to 8 years. And then after that, it got more infrequent because I was starting my young family. So. Have
you taken your children back?
Yes, so I went back with my wife and my eldest, Sophia. So we went back to see the family. And then 2 years after that, we went back with my son, who's the middle one, Raf. And then the youngest, Alia, was due to go back this year. And COVID's completely kibosh that. So she keeps reminding me, she's going, Dad, I haven't been back yet. It's my turn. I want to go back and see the family.
Do you talk to your children about your British culture or teach them anything about where you're from? How do you find that with your children growing up in Australia? They're Australian. How do you find that? Yeah, no, it's quite interesting.
We're a bit of a mixed household because we've got the Australian part. We've got the Italian part, and the kids definitely relate to the Italian part, and then the British part is exactly the same. They relate to that as well. So we talk about it all the time. And when they go to school, I'll give you an example. We've got the battle of the yogurt versus yogurt.
Oh God, yeah.
And that's just the tip of an iceberg. There's lots of these little battles, but I was losing miserably with the kids where they were telling me I wasn't talking properly and I need to pronounce it properly. And Dad, you're not in Britain anymore. Blah blah blah. And then luckily for me, my daughter started to make really good friends with an Irish family, a South African family, and a couple of North, I think one's from Wigan and one's from Lancashire. And so now she's got this little group of friends who have parents who come from, I guess, that part of the world. South Africa's a bit of a rogue one there. And they're all saying yogurt. Yeah, I have to make sure I got that right around
yes,
then. And
you did.
so she's now started to say it. So now there's the battle of the yogurt and the yogurt in the school. And so she's got this little core group. And so now she's saying it the way we say it at home.
I like that. Do they know much about England and where you're from?
Yeah, no, we talk about it a lot. We just bought a portal, and I hadn't heard of the portal, which is like a webcam you attach to your TV. And so it just integrates into Messenger and WhatsApp. And we call the family on the portal. And it's literally like having granddad or great granddad or, you know, the cousins on the TV, and they're life size. So it's like they're all sitting in the lounge, and the camera just moves around. It tracks you in your lounge. And so we've really been using that a lot in the last 6 months. And so the kids have a lot of interactions with my family back in the UK. And we're always talking about England and what's going on back home. And not just England. I mean, some of the family's Scottish, some's Irish. So there's a real big mix there.
Oh, that's so good, that portal. Sounds brilliant.
Yeah, no, actually it's a surprise purchase. I was a bit unsure, but I bought into the hype of my family back in the UK, and it's actually really good.
What do you miss most about home?
I probably miss all of the really bad food that we grew up on in the 80s and 90s before everyone started realising sugar was bad for you. So there's a real kind of miss of cocoa and frosted shreddies, Pop-Tarts, all the things that I know I shouldn't really eat and I don't really want my kids to eat. But they're the things that just stick there fondly in my memory of waking up in the morning and having that sugar-laced cereal and enjoying it with ice cold milk. That's probably the one that really sticks in mind, because now, because we're so health conscious, it's like, here's some pretty boring Weetabix or Wheatabix or Wheatbix, whatever. and here's some really boring cornflakes with no sugar attached to them whatsoever. So yeah, that's probably one thing. And yeah, because of health reasons, I'm not trying to mimic that with my kids, but I think that's something that's missed.
You can't miss the food too much. Your wife's a chef. Come on.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
When you first came over here, did you come over for work? What was your visa?
Yeah, so I came over on a 457. So it was a 4-year visa, and it was
sponsorship.
Yeah, sponsored. So yeah, I had a grandmother pass away in the UK, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go and do something a bit wacky. And one of my friends, our industry is quite prevalent with freelancers. So if you look at how many people come out with an offshore surveying degree, so it's mapping the seabed and understanding all of the science around that and processing that data.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's not many universities in Australia that do it. And so they do rely on international support to plug that skill set. So there's actually quite a big freelance market. So people that will live around the world, come in, do the job, and then they'll go back again. And so I had friends who had worked for a company down here in Australia, for Woodside, off the Northwest Shelf. And he said, oh, look, they're looking for surveyors, and they actually want to grow their workforce. They don't just want to use freelancers. They want to sponsor, bring people in and expand, because they're growing and there's a lot of work going on at the moment. So yeah, I had that loss in the family, and I just literally decided to send my CV into an email address they gave me.
How old were you at the time?
I would have been 20, just nearly 23.
Oh, quite young.
So yeah, so I sent it in, and within half an hour I got a response saying, can we call you? And this would have been very early hours of the morning. So I'm an early riser, and I'd sent the email in about 6:30 in the morning. I got the email back by 7. So 8 hours ahead for Australia. And then I said, yeah, I'll give you a call. And we're on the phone. We did a phone interview, lasted 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And then he said, how quick can you get out? And I'm like, kind of a bit like hesitant. I wasn't expecting it to be that quick. And I was like, well, just give me, my dad's getting married. I've got to have my notice in. Just give me maybe 4 weeks. And he said, yep, 4 weeks done. We'll start booking your flights. We'll sort your visas out. And I was like, okay, do you need any info from me? He said, yeah, the HR will reach out to you in the next coming hours via email if you give them the information. I was like, okay. So I got off my phone, and I was actually shell-shocked. And I was like, I'm going to Australia in 4 weeks. What am I going to do? So there was just this, I remember telling my parents, and they were like, they didn't believe me first of all. And then my granddad was more cautious. He was like, are you sure this is real? Are you sure this isn't some sort of scheme? They're not going to get your money? I said, no, they're buying my stuff. They're buying the flights. They're doing that.
So they paid for everything, your employers?
Everything was paid for. That's how desperate they were. So
wow, you are lucky.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit different now. So that would have been back in 2006. Yeah, so early 2006. And I sold everything. I had a mini board that I used to use to go surfing down in the southwest of the UK, just at Fistral Beach. And so I literally sold everything. I packed my bags. Had my flight with Emirates, and I remember going to check in. I had this massive suitcase. It was probably about 40 kilos, and I had my big 7'6" mini Mal. And I rocked up to the desk, and I said, I'm off to there. And she was, oh, that bag looks heavy. And I said, oh yeah, look, I've got a seaman's ticket. And she went, oh, I suppose you've got a nectar card as well, have you? And I said, well, no, because for us in the marine industry, if you have a seaman's ticket or a sort of seaman's book, it means you're a mariner, you get extra allowance. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so when I told her I had a seaman's ticket, she just looked at me and said, have you got a Nectar card or a Tesco Club card? Thinking I was trying everything under the book to try and get extra allowance. So she got a supervisor over. I managed to check it all in without being paid any excess luggage. And I just remember landing in Perth, never been to Australia, and I got out of the airplane, and I can just remember just smelling eucalyptus. That's all the memory that sticks in my mind, was smelling eucalyptus. And one of the owners, because the business has since been sold, and I've stayed with it for the whole 15 years, but it's changed hands a few times. But one of the owners picked me up, and I got dropped off at the Rose and Crown in Guildford, and I was there probably 4 weeks, and then I was in a company house in West Perth for another 3 months paid for, and then eventually I got my first apartment in West Perth.
Jammy, you did really well,
yeah,
didn't you?
I did well, yeah.
That's fab. For anyone who's back in the UK now and they want to come to Australia, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you look at jumping overseas, you know, there's especially where I grew up in Essex, you've got the Costa del Essex, which is a big swath of Spain where most of the people from Essex have moved to. And so, you know, when you're talking to your friends back home, there's the horizons kind of go out in waves. So there's the group that think about Europe, they think about France, they think about Spain, they think about the language barrier. But there's so many people, so many Brits living over there that they form these little enclaves. I suppose no different to us here in Australia,
Definitely.
But they form these enclaves, and I guess, but it's still quite close to home. I think Australia, I think I think Australia has the tyranny of distance. So technology means we can communicate a lot easier with our family. I do remember still using phone cards when I came out 15 years ago and going into the phone boxes and using the phone card. Very quickly replaced by Skype and various other.
Oh, that would have been tough.
Yeah, it would have been, but it was only because I didn't really have a good internet connection.
Yeah.
But then once we got the internet and stuff, then Skype was used more often. But when I look at it, Australia really, but Australia does have the distance. I think it makes it easier that culturally we are very similar. I often joke to say that Australians really are just Brits who've had sunlight and got cheerful. I mean, when you look at us back at home, people call us whinging or moaning Poms. It's just because we don't see sunlight very often. So you come over to Australia, you give us sunlight for, a couple of months, and, you know, Australia, you come to Perth and 100 days of straight sunshine, and then basically you start turning into an Australian, because that's all we needed, sunlight.
Definitely.
And then we're not whingy or moany anymore.
I know. Just for anyone back home who's listening, over here we are known as whinging Poms, aren't we? Like, that's just what we're known for. Yeah. But over here they do see us as whingers. Yeah. I do love a good whinge though, don't you? Oh,
you do. It's a fine art. You've got to tune that in. But yeah, so look, culturally it's very similar. It's just that leap of faith. It's that initial leap of faith. But when you get out here, it's actually, you know, there's a lot of support. Culturally similar. There's great groups. Obviously, Poms in Perth is one of them. Of course, I'm going to shout that out. But there's great groups in place, and I just think the process of moving over is not as difficult as it used to be.
Why do you reckon you said it's not as difficult as it used to be to come over here? What did you mean by that?
I just think technology's made things a lot easier. I just think, you know, if you go, I mean, I wasn't a £10 Pom. Obviously, I'm only 15 years, so it's not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things. But when you look at, say, the next generation up, so equivalent of our parents, if you look at our parents when they came out, if they came out, they would have come out as a £10 Pom. which again, for anyone that doesn't know that's, it's very big in Australia. In the UK, maybe we don't remember it, but in Australia, a lot of the original POMs came out on basically ships. They paid £10. There was a big scheme on Australia to bring more immigration out, and so they came out. But when they came out, there was phones, but phones were expensive to ring back home. There was a lot more of the old school letter writing. Communicating back home was a lot more difficult. And I really think the communication piece is what makes it easier, and that's where technology has made things a lot more streamlined for us to be able to move out here. Obviously, there's all the visa requirements and the skills and everything else you need. Obviously, Australia's quite strict on that, and you need to have that skill set for them. But once you're out here, it's not as hard as it used to be.
So you used to do what we call over here FIFO work, fly in, fly out work.
Yeah.
You used to do that from back at home. But here, see, that's a really big thing over here. But when I was back at home, I'd never heard of FIFO or fly in, fly out work.
Yep.
So can you just explain to us what that is and what that's like?
In the UK, when I worked for a company back there, I kind of experienced it. We didn't call it FIFO, but I experienced it because I was working overseas. So for me, it wasn't unusual to do that. But for the general UK population, it's quite an unusual concept. In Australia, it's very common. So FIFO really, Perth's a very isolated city. All of its natural resources predominantly sit to the north of the state. And that's, jump on a plane, that's a 2-hour flight. If you go further north or further inland, it could even be up to 3 hours and you're still within the same state flying around. And so when they use the term FIFO, that's someone who will jump on a plane at the Perth domestic airport, go on an internal flight for 2 or 3 hours, which for us is like flying from the UK to Greece. And then you're still in the same state, and then you appear in the middle of a dusty, dry part of the state, and there they'll be mining iron ore. Or in my instance, I would fly to Dampier, join a ship, or go on a helicopter and fly out to a rig or a survey ship and survey the seabed. And again, that's where all our oil and gas resources are in the States. So, and you do that for they change the rotations all the time, but 2, 4, 6 weeks, and then you'd have time off back in Perth. So there's a real strong flavour of FIFO work in Perth where families have one of the members of the household will fly out. You won't see them for 2, 4, 6 weeks, and then they'll come back for 2, 4, 6 weeks, and they'll be basically not working, going out, enjoying the coffee and the lifestyle, doing all the things with the kids, and they'll be enjoying having mum and dad back, and then they'll repeat the process again.
And do you think it's easy for anyone who might be coming out here? Would it be easy for them to get a job like that when they're over here without the experience in that kind of work, do you think?
Look, it depends. I mean, there's so many. I mean, my trade's very specialised. But if you look at Sparkies, you look at you look at that trade. I mean, that has applications across the board. So you can locate to Perth with your Sparky trade. I don't know the details. Maybe there'll be some sort of conversion course probably they have to do to make sure they apply to Australian standards, no doubt. I know it was on the skill set years ago when I came out under the 457 because I remember seeing it there. But they could come out, they could work for the building industry in the metropolitan Perth and apply that trade there, or they can go out to the mines and apply that trade there. So, but when you look at those trades, you're basically going out to effectively what is a self-contained mini town. And so you can imagine any town will need electricians, they'll need plumbers, they'll need construction. So all of those things that you'd have in any normal town in the UK or in Perth Metropolitan is also needed in the mines. And so you can have one of those trades but then become a FIFO worker.
When you first got here, did you consider that this is where you're going to be living for the rest of your life, potentially?
No, I don't think I did initially. I think I just had it in the big idea of it's a big adventure. So the industry I work in, I travelled around quite a bit. I'd been to West Africa, I'd been up into Greenland and Iceland, been through the Mediterranean. And so I travelled a lot. So for me, Perth was just an extension of that, but with a little bit more seriousness obviously locating. And I thought I'd do my 4-year visa and that would be it. And I mentioned to you before, I had that wobble at 6 years. So I did my 4-year visa. And then after my 4-year visa, I actually then changed my role slightly. I took an office-based job into the more commercial tendering side. And so I had to reapply for a new 457. And I only did 2 years of that new 457 before I then got my permanent residency. And then obviously then jumped onto the citizenship after that as well.
Yeah, so how long have you been a citizen now?
I think it was probably 1 year into meeting my wife, so probably about 8 years ago I became a citizen, yeah.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Sounds like it all worked out really well for you coming over here.
Yeah, it seems a bit weird how it all just seemed to align so well. Like I said, if I decided to do that now, I don't think I'm brave enough. I think back then you're a little bit more young, dumb, and whatever the last part of that comment is. And now I don't think I'd have the balls to do it.
It is a big move, definitely,
yes,
yeah. I asked the Britstralian Facebook community group how long they'd been in Australia. Just over 1 in 3 have been here less than 10 years. Another third of them said they'd spent 10 to 20 years of their lives in Australia. Around a quarter of the group haven't made it over yet. And only 5% said they'd been here for more than 20 years. You can join us on Facebook. Just search Britstralian, all one word. And don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss the next episode of Britstralian.